Hello, welcome to my next chapter, a show where we talk about what comes after your retirement. Today, we are going to talk about caregiving and the differences between agencies and hiring someone who is just out in the world. There are over 650,000 informal caregivers in Massachusetts. Almost 30,000 of them are grandparents who are raising their grandchildren. So this information should also be helpful for those of you who are responsible for your grandchildren, especially if they have special needs. To begin with, just so everyone is clear, an informal caregiver is a relative or a friend, and a formal caregiver is anyone who is paid to take care of someone. You may hear us use both of these phrases today. So Massachusetts ranks 9th in the country for the number of people who are 85, while only 22nd for those who are 60 and over. We do a great job keeping our older family members alive, but that often comes at a cost, a financial as well as a health cost for those taking care of them. As we age, we sometimes need a little bit of help or even a lot of help with our activities of daily living or ADLs. After assessing our needs, such as meal prep, house cleaning, bathing, or just a companion, the next step is deciding whether to hire an individual or an agency. Both have pros and cons, with cost most often being the deciding factor. I will admit to having a bias toward one over the other, which will come across during this interview, but I will also try to bring up the pros of both. I would like to stress that whatever your choice, the most important thing is that you get help, especially if you are a caregiver. Caregivers often don't outlive those they are caring for, as their own health usually takes a back seat for caring for their loved ones. That includes children, spouses or partners, and parents. Having someone come in to do some meal prep, laundry, and cleaning at a minimum can literally be a lifesaver, giving the caregiver time to care for themselves or do things they love, including spending time with friends and family away from the stress of being a caregiver. So I asked Ryan McEniff, the owner of Minute Women Home Care, to come and talk about the differences between hiring an agency and hiring a private individual. Minute Women Home Care is a private home health agency located in Lexington since 1969. And outside of being involved with Minute Women, Ryan enjoys spearfishing, golfing, and snowboarding. Minute Women has been around for a long time. Before we start, can you give me just a little history of your agency, what services you offer, and what brought you to work in this business?
Yeah, sure. Minute Women was started in 1969. My aunt ran it for many, many years. And I grew up locally in this area, and I moved out to Colorado. My parents moved down to Florida in retirement, and then unfortunately, soon after, my mom got sick. She had cancer. It was terminal, so I moved back with my parents down to Florida, helped through that final transition, if you will. And my aunt was there and said, as we were seeing 24-hour home care, as we were seeing hospice, if I wanted to get back into my old neck of the woods and take over the company and purchase the company from her, and which I did, and I'm thankful that I did. I consider it my mom's last gift to me, to be able to give me that opportunity. And so that's how Minute Women went from being owned by my aunt to then being owned by me, and I took it over around 2011. So in a nutshell, what we do is we provide home health care services, generally for seniors, but it can be for anybody. And the three primary reasons we're in somebody's home is somebody has memory care issues, memory problems, dementia, they are a fall risk, or they are discharged from a hospital and are weak while they're recuperating at home, and they need help for a few days to a few weeks to a few months. Those are probably the three main reasons why people call us up, but really anybody that needs any kind of help staying safe in their own home is a reason people give us a call.
Okay, great. So let's start with the most obvious.
Sure.
It often costs less to hire a private individual. There may not be a minimum number of hours. And if more care is needed, often a companion can be hired to live in the home with the individual. This can be particularly attractive as the cost of 24-hour care gets really cost prohibitive. But there are downsides to this. Caregiving is stressful and difficult. You hire someone to help you care for your loved one, and that person gets sick, goes on vacation, whatever, and they can't work. So obviously, if you hire an individual and they can't work, you don't have anyone to come in and take care of that person, and you have to stay home from work, or you're scrambling to find somebody, or the person ends up in a nursing home, at least for a couple of days. So if someone what happens if someone goes through an agency and the caregiver can't work?
Yeah, so if somebody goes through an agency, I mean, the benefits, and you listed a number of them, people are using agencies because of what you just talked about, that if something happens where a caregiver has a flat tire, they have their own emergency, they get sick, we have a Rolodex of other caregivers that we've vetted, that we've hired on, that are trained and are insured to be able to go out and cover that shift for 1, 2, or 3 days. So you may have your favorite caregiver that you want every single day or as much as possible, but at the end of the day, things come up on a long enough time scale. People do get sick, emergencies happen, and it's the peace of mind of knowing that you can call an office, speak with somebody, and somebody else will be able to come out, whether that's a sick caregiver or you need more help that you weren't expecting to need over the weekend because something came up. So both things can happen pretty regularly.
Okay. On that same kind of vein, caregiver gets hurt in your house. So with an agency, who's responsible and for what?
Yeah, so with most agencies, and you have to clearly define this when you're interviewing any agency to hire them, but for the most part, most of them are all, the caregivers are their employees, which means that they're insured and that they're bonded. So if there's an injury in the home, which is the most common situation to happen under an insurance claim, is that usually a caregiver's back goes, something happens where they get injured on the job, and the family has that peace of mind that they're not going to be on the hook for that. We have workers' compensation that we pay into, and of course the caregivers can utilize whenever they get injured on the job. That's the biggest benefit when it comes to insurance and hiring privately or hiring through an agency.
Okay. So obviously if somebody hires someone privately, they're on the hook if someone gets hurt.
Yeah, and it's not always just the back blows out, but people are moving up and down stairs, and they're helping another person go up and down the stairs. So if that person legs collapse and they go down the stairs, they might be bringing the caregiver with them, and that can be obviously detrimental to not only the client but the caregiver. So it's not just necessarily the back or the shoulder; it could be a trip and a fall that can go down a flight of stairs.
Okay. So, but also brings up the point that if you have somebody working in your home that is not through an agency, you also need to think about workers' compensation.
Absolutely.
To cover yourself. So we've all heard the stories in the news about, because I'm starting with the worst and I'll get better.
Right.
We've all heard the stories in the news about elders being scammed by their caregivers.
Yep.
That goes without saying. What happens if that occurs with someone from an agency? Where's the oversight when the hired caregiver is an individual hired by the individual or the caregiver?
Yeah.
Well?
So I mean, this is another scary one that came up. It came up in the Boston Globe in the last few months that caregivers were taking advantage of the people they were caring for. So one of the things that's difficult in any service business, whether it's home care, whether it's house cleaning, whatever, is actually proving that somebody stole the money. Because especially in senior care, you're generally dealing with people that have memory issues. And 9 times out of 10, they swear that they put the money in this drawer and it's in a different drawer, and it shows up a few days later, a few weeks later, or whatever it might be. But in the cases, in the few and far between cases that we have felt that there is that chance that a caregiver took any money or anything like that, generally as an agency, we just reimburse that either through a direct check or through a credit through care. And because, for the nominal amount of money, for $100 or $200, it's not worth ruining the reputation of our company, as well as having a customer be that upset with us that's we want to have a good relationship with. So while it happens rarely, certainly we want to be cognizant of the fact that it very well could have happened, and we talk to the caregiver, we talk to the family members, we make a decision with the family what is best. Because sometimes the family members say, listen, this probably didn't happen, this occurs all the time. Or the family members might say, this is the only time mom has ever accused anybody of taking money, I'm guessing it kind of happened. So it's it's having an agency that is available to investigate what's going on and work with the family in determining how to come up with a resolution to a problem, which is what we do every single day, whether it's with care services, whether it's with money or things like that.
Are your caregivers allowed to do checkbooks and write do bills and things like that?
Yeah, so
Getting
what
access?
we recommend for anybody is to use a credit card. The reason being is that it's a paper trail. You can't fake that you took $500 off of a credit card. While when the worst case scenario for us when it comes with money is that the client is claiming they gave a caregiver $100 and the caregiver is saying, no, you gave me $10 or whatever that might be, and then all of a sudden there's that disconnect. Now, is $90 am I gonna worry about $90? Not necessarily, but what if that's a caregiver that person really trusted and liked for such a long period of time, and then that trust is broken, whether it's true or not? Well, at that point, it doesn't matter. The trust is already gone in terms of the senior, and that might have been a really good relationship. So we prefer to have it be a credit card rather than cash or using a check.
Okay. And just for the folks out there to know that if you have a caregiver that is scamming or stealing from a loved one, that has to go through the police, and there's more of an investigation. And often Protective Services has to come in and investigate as well. So that could be really difficult. And there have been stories out there where people have really gained the trust of somebody and gotten to their checkbooks, used their credit, and really scam them for thousands and thousands of dollars. So it does pay to be really, really careful.
And you're also dealing with a segment of the population that's used to cash, right? While the younger generations aren't using cash as much, so
They don't know what cash is.
exactly right. So when you're used to dealing with cash, the problem is there's no paper trail with cash. It can disappear easily, and we've all been there where we find the $20 bill in our jeans that we haven't worn in a few weeks. So it can disappear and reappear, while at least with checks and at least with credit cards, there's a paper trail with it.
Right. Okay. So if the need for a caregiver happens as an illness progresses or the aging process starts making the individual more frail, what happens as more care is needed?
Yeah, well, at least with us admitted women, we have our scenario, our agreement with families is that if you need more care, we can accommodate that. If you need less care, we can accommodate that as well. I mean, it's certainly a difference between going with a private caregiver versus an agency, that maybe that private caregiver can't ramp up as easily as we can, or maybe they can't ramp down as easily. They might be expecting guaranteed hours versus we can go with the ebbs and flows of things. The other thing that I think is a little bit related to this, and if I'm jumping ahead, hospice. There are some caregivers out there that we have, and as well as privates, that don't like to work on hospice cases for whatever reason that is, and we have to respect that. So as we read in the Globe, there were certain caregivers that said, I'll be around until you need me at hospice, and then I'm gone, and those privates were gone when hospice was needed. With an agency, we know the caregivers that are okay with hospice, we know the caregivers that aren't, so that we are going to put a caregiver in if it's ever needed that hospice is going to be on the table, that we can put a caregiver in that we know is going to be able to transition from just providing care to providing hospice support as well.
Okay, awesome. That's good to know.
Yeah.
A hospice is tough. It comes in at the last, at the end of days, obviously, people are at their most emotional, and have someone they trust and know is much better, obviously, than having someone who they have never met before.
And just to say, it doesn't mean the caregivers are bad people because of it. It might be because they get so attached to somebody that they can't go through that every 3 months or every 3 weeks to see somebody pass away. Everybody deals with death differently. And
hospice is tough. It takes
very
a special person to be able to go through that and sit with somebody while they're actively dying. That's, you face your own mortality when you do that, and not everyone can do that.
Absolutely.
So, what about general oversight to a case? You've got people in there, and time goes on. Do you do regular checks to make sure that they don't need more care or less care, or that the care is appropriate for what they are doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I preference this answer with, in Massachusetts, there's very little oversight when it comes to private agencies. And when I say very little, there's basically none. And why I bring that up is what I say I do and what other agencies do can be totally different things.
Right.
I'd like to think we do more than most, but there might be somebody out there that's doing something differently. With us, we have a dedicated home health care supervisor that is a caregiver as well, but we've hired them and promoted them to be a health aide supervisor to go out and do supervisory visits. And anytime a new caregiver is going into a case, they are going to meet with our home health aide supervisor to have a 1-hour intro on what's involved in that case. So while of course we have our care plan, which is a piece of paper that explains everything, we also go over that one-on-one with a caregiver. And let's say we're in a situation where somebody has an ostomy. And maybe that caregiver is a great caregiver, but they haven't done an ostomy in many years. We'll send our home health aide supervisor out as many times as needed to get them to be comfortable with that procedure. That way it's a win-win for the family, for the client, for the caregiver. The more we can do to make it a successful transition to using in-house caregiving, the easier it is on the person that's getting it, because they're used to being alone, and now that privacy and that peace and quiet might be gone in their eyes. So any way we can make that easier, we certainly try to.
So is the person who kind of oversees, are they a nurse or are they a home health aide, or what is their what are they?
Well, yeah, everybody's a little bit different. We don't have a nurse on hand, and we did at one point in time, but what we realized was the nurse really wasn't doing a whole lot of nursing tasks. They were because private home care is non-medical. So we're not going to be doing injections and things of that nature. So we decided to hire our best home health aide to be that supervisor. And then above the home health aide, we have our director of client care, where she has a wealth of experience working in assisted livings, VNAs, and being a home caregiver herself at one point in time. So while we don't have somebody that's necessarily a nurse, there are other agencies that do, but my opinion at this time is that what we have for oversight works really well, and we do have people that are very knowledgeable about the tasks that we're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Are you checking on a regular basis, like every 6 months, or do you review the cases?
Oh, every 6 months? No, every week, every 2 weeks? Yeah, no.
Okay.
Every 6 months would be way too long of a period in my opinion. We do have some cases that have been going on forever that they don't need us to come out as regularly, but for the vast majority of cases, our home health aide supervisors out there every week, if not every 2 weeks.
Okay, awesome. Now here's the fun part.
All right.
What if you really need care?
Yeah.
But you can't afford it? Are there any alternatives?
Well, that's where things become difficult, right? Because we were talking before. What's the main differentiator between using a private home care versus using an agency like myself? And it comes down to money, right? It's money and insurance. And so if you don't have a lot of money, what you need to look at is either, unfortunately, maybe a private caregiver is all you can afford, but there are opportunities through ASAPs like Minuteman Senior Services or Wellspring down in Waltham to ask what's available. You're available to find out what different options there are. I know that over at Leahy, they have grants that are available for people discharging that can help support them for private agencies. So there are certain ways and certain resources that you can talk to people that have information and knowledge about what services are available and how much they're going to cost.
Okay. And so everyone knows Minuteman is on a sliding scale fee. So depending on what your income is, it's cheaper to have services through them. I don't even know what the top number is anymore. But even if you're over income, if there's two of you, there's respite programs that will reduce the cost of the care.
Absolutely.
So how do you go about finding? Well, actually, let me back up a little bit to say that if you have somebody you've hired privately, and money starts to become an issue, there are no other options, because that person obviously is depending on their paycheck from you to.
Yeah, that is kind of the end of the road when it comes to having one-on-one care, and that's when probably somebody needs to start looking at nursing home care and going into a long-term facility.
So how do you go about finding an agency?
Well, that's the fun question, right? And it's a difficult question because, again, there's very little oversight. And with that, I always recommend speaking with people like yourself. Part of your job is to know what the resources are in the area. The problem with private agencies right now is a lot of them can pop up and then 9 months later they're gone. And that doesn't mean that they're bad intentions, but it's difficult starting a business and getting it up and running. And when you're starting a business, it can be difficult to invest the money in the oversight, in the supervisors, and all the visits and things like that. So it really comes down to asking specific questions like, what happens if somebody calls out? What happens if I need more care on Saturday night? Who do I talk to? And you'll start finding out what kind of agency that is. If they say, well, we close at 5 o'clock on a Friday and you can get us on 8 o'clock on Monday. I don't know if you want to use that agency,
Right.
especially if you have over the weekend care. So unfortunately right now the due diligence is on the family to find the right agency. But there are some resources out there. I am a member of the Home Care Alliance of Massachusetts. They do have an accreditation process, which I'm part of as well, and that allows you to start narrowing down that pipeline and figuring out who you want to use. I am not part of this, but I know that some agencies work with Minuteman, and I think it would be an assumption, but maybe a positive assumption that if they're doing a good job for Minuteman, they might be able to do a good job as a private agency as well. So those are some ways that you can start narrowing down who you want to use. And of course, the almighty Google. Look at some reviews. It's not a perfect system, but word of mouth reviews, talking to you about the reviews you've heard, and going online. It's all what we have to do to find a restaurant or find a private agency these days.
Well, and we do a lot of networking, so I get to know people.
Yeah.
So it's based on personality. If I know and I'm trusting the upper echelons of a company,
Sure.
then we're more likely to have trust in them to take care of our clients.
Yeah, and when you're working with people, like things inevitably go wrong, and really what I say to people is that when things go, what you want to know is when things go wrong, and they will go wrong on a long enough time scale, what happens?
Right.
And that's the question that's important. Is somebody going to sit there and say, well, I guess that's going to be your problem, or they can say, here are the steps that we normally follow when X, Y, and Z happen to make sure that this situation is contained and then fixed as quickly as possible.
I would imagine too that if you have well-trained caregivers who have the backing of an agency, when things start to get more difficult and get over that person's head, the caregiver's head, that having that agency to back them up and say, look, you need to get more care for this person, even if it's just a certified nursing assistant in all the time or whatever, if the family doesn't want nursing facilities, that you're not going to get that with a caregiver who's just going to be like, well, I don't want to lose my job. I'm just going to cover things up. And
no, absolutely. I mean, it's part of the process and part of the people we have in my office. With Janet being the director of client care, part of her job is every week she's calling up caregivers and finding out if there has been a change in condition with any of our clients, and are people improving or are they declining? Because the family needs to know one way or another what's going on with their loved one, and that feedback from the caregivers is extremely important. They're the ones letting us know how somebody's doing.
Yeah. Okay. And I think it's actually the same way at the senior center. We often see more of the seniors than the family does.
Yeah.
And, it's up to us to let the family know when they start to have issues. So what are some of the things that someone should be most concerned about when hiring an agency?
I think kind of going back to when things go wrong, what happens? What happens if the caregiver calls out at 7 a.m. for an 8 a.m. shift? And the worst thing an agency can do is say, well, that's going to be your problem. Somebody might not show up and you're going to have to deal with it on your own. And then tomorrow morning somebody will be back. That to me is unacceptable. It's finding out what's going to happen when things go wrong. What happens if my mom unexpectedly needs more care? And then the other one is that I've seen is what happens with the service agreement or the contract. If healthcare, things can change rapidly. am I stuck using you for a certain period of time or a certain amount of money, and until I hit $10,000 spent, I can't get out of this agreement we have? Those are some things that I think are red flags to me with different agencies. In my opinion, if you're using my services, you're going to continue using me because I'm doing a good job.
Right.
And if you're not using me, it's probably because your mom needed more care or passed away, unfortunately. And those are no acceptable. They're not acceptable reasons to hold somebody in a service agreement.
And I would say that a very good private agency will say at some point, if somebody gets to be too much, it's time to
Oh,
move up to the
absolutely.
next step and maybe have an agency with a nurse and all of that. And a lot of times I've seen families use two different agencies. They've been
Yeah.
with an agency for a long time. They trust that agency to make sure that people are there, but they also need the bathing and the nursing.
And maybe
care.
that agency can't do the hours they're looking for.
Right.
No, absolutely. You want to think about what happens in the most stressful times, not when everything's going smoothly. Another thing to ask is how long the office staff have been in with the company. Now, that doesn't mean if somebody's new that they're not good, but if you're noticing there's a change every 3 months or 6 months in the people you're talking to, that means that there's a bit of dysfunction going on in that operation, and there's a reason why there's turnover there. And that new person doesn't know your mom like somebody who's been working there 3 years knows your mom.
And that goes with private. That goes with the certified. It goes with assisted living, and it goes
Absolutely.
with nursing homes. If your people who are in the office aren't staying, then there's something going on.
It would be the same with your, like, hey, listen, it's really with any industry and any job, the less turnover, the better. And while there's turnover in every industry, it shouldn't be every 3 months.
Right. Okay. What happens? And we're running very low on time. But what happens if a caregiver and a caregiver don't get along, or there's a conflict?
We move the caregiver out. I mean, if that's where we're at, if the client says we don't want the caregiver, that's part of our services, that we're the ones that tell the caregiver, break the bad news, and then we'll supply them with somebody else. Now, if it's an area in which we feel that there can be training, like ostomy we were talking about, well, I would prefer to be able to invest the time with training somebody on that specific task to get them better, rather than switching it out, because it can be hard to find the right match. And so if it's just a bit of training that's needed, I prefer to do that than go the other option, which is changing somebody out.
Okay, awesome. And of course, I'm not going to get to all my questions.
No worries.
But patient bill of rights.
Yeah.
What is it, really quickly, and who provides it?
Well, what we provide their HIPAA rights. So they have the expectation in being able to know that their information is going to be secure and private with us. With the patient, our kind of feeling with the patient's bill of rights, the biggest part for us is that the patients have a choice to choose us or anybody else that they want for those services. And that kind of goes back to saying, hey, we don't lock you into a contract that you can't get out of. So, that's kind of one of the biggest things that hits our industry, is making sure that families have the choice to be able to choose whoever they want. And that's, what we try to abide by and go with.
Okay. Do you guys have a contract that people have to sign?
We do, but it's non-binding in the fact that if they call us up and say they don't want to use their services anymore, it's done. It's a very basic 1.5 page contract that's not full of legalese that nobody understands.
Awesome. And I would actually suggest that anybody who is hiring someone individually has a contract as well. But that also goes to, if there's a conflict, then you have to go through the whole hiring process, which means background checks and advertising and all of that. However, we have like 10 seconds left. So for anyone who wants more information, the Family Caregiver Alliance at www.caregiver.org has a ton of information on how to do background checks and everything. So thank you, Ryan, for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everyone, for being with us.